I made a lot of mistakes this past year in planting trees. Now, in my defense, I've never had the space to plant trees, and I was really excited about getting trees planted because obviously trees take the longest to mature. So I wanted to get them in the ground and going pretty much before we started anything else. One of my favorite sayings is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So I took that to heart, and unfortunately I led with my heart instead of my head. Now, the best time here to plant bare root trees, especially fruit trees and things like that, is January. And so last January, I bought a bunch of trees, bare root fruit trees there, and my apple trees. And I thought I'm going to, put them in pots. I'm going to have them in pots until maybe April, 4 months, and then I'll have the orchard area ready, and we'll be able to go forward and have my orchard already getting started. Can you guys see back there how much I've done on the chicken coop? I'll give you a closer look in a minute. So that was supposed to be January. They were supposed to be ready. Well, here we are in almost November, and it's not ready because while I got all the terracing done here, it's not the full terrace that's coming further this way. And once this last wall is up, then this area I'm standing on will be raised a bit, and I will have a flat area to put my fruit trees. But they're still not ready, which is okay at this point because we're moving into the dormant season again, and at least until January, February, they'll be fine sitting in those pots. And I hope to have that, I will have the orchard ready by January or February. So I bought several other trees, bare root and otherwise, for all parts of the property. I had originally bought 3 liquid amber trees, and I put them up against this fence. I didn't know about the appropriate gopher wire to protect them, and all 3 of them were taken by the gophers. I got several flowering cherry trees, an almond tree. Unfortunately, the compost issue I had, if you've been with me since this past spring, where I had the salty compost, I had used that compost in part to transplant or to pot up those trees, and they didn't make it. All of those died. I bought 2 red bud trees for the cottage garden. Here's one right here. They've been sitting in pots since probably March, April. Those are getting planted today. Now down along this fence coming up the drive, I planted 3 carrot trees and 5 poplar trees. And these poplar trees, well, none of these trees had regular watering. In the beginning, I didn't have drip set up out here. I was just gonna hand water them, and that didn't go so well. And so I put in drip finally. They started doing a little bit better, but then as the heat of summer came on, I realized a little bit too late that there were not enough drip emitters for these trees, and so all of the leaves turned brown and fell off. They're coming back now that I remedied that problem, but just another failure on the tree front here on this property. I got this tree for about 50 bucks, and I started looking around, and if I just saved my money, I could get one about 5 or 6 times the size in a 24-inch wooden box for about $200. Now, $200 is a lot. However, I lost way more than $200 on all the mistakes that I made, and I don't know, it's a small price to pay for me if you can save up and just buy the tree that you really want in a size that is going to have years on those tiny small ones. I mean, for an extra 150 bucks, I can get a tree that probably has 5 extra years of growth on it. And for me, that's worth it. However, I am not ready to buy new trees yet because today I'm going to be planting trees I've already got. I've got other trees that have been sitting around waiting to be planted, especially the 2 red bud trees that need to be planted in the cottage garden. And that begs the question, when is the best time to plant a tree? Is it now in fall, or is it in spring? All through the spring and the summer, trees are putting on a lot of top growth, leaves, branches, stems. And then in the fall, most of them, or the deciduous at least, start to go dormant. Depending on where you are, it will happen at different times. And other trees just kind of slow down, even if they stay evergreen. That is the best time to dig up, transplant, plant, because the roots are going to get much less of a shock, because they're already the plants on top at least are going to sleep, and the roots have less to do. This season could start in September, October, probably for most of you. For more mild winter climates like me, that can go all the way up to December. And you can look around at the trees in your area to get a clue on what you should be doing at that moment. If trees around you are still green or even have their leaves on them, then that's a pretty good sign that you can go ahead and still plant your trees. If you want to make really sure that it's still okay to plant trees, you can test your soil temperature several consecutive mornings. And if the temperature is 50 degrees or above, it's safe to go ahead and plant trees. Now, this is mainly for deciduous trees, trees that lose their leaves, that 50-degree mark. For evergreens, you'll probably want it more like 60 degrees to go ahead, and 60 degrees or higher to plant those. Now, if you've already had your first freeze or snow, then let's wait until spring to plant any trees in your area. Other trees that you should wait and plant until spring are tropicals. Now, I'm looking forward to this winter because that is when I start to turn this huge parking lot of a patio into my tropical garden. And I'll be digging out all kinds of planting space and a pond. And as much as I wanted to plant those trees this fall, I really wanted to go buy them, but it is not the time. They really want to go into the ground when when the ground is starting to warm up, because that's when they're going to start getting their growth happening, not when the ground is getting colder. So tropical trees and plants, you want to wait until spring. All right, so we're going to head up to the cottage garden. I'll show you what the cottage looks like now, and we'll get started on planting this redbud tree that has been waiting for months. And also, while we're planting, I'll give you some tips to help your trees get through even the coldest winter. All right, take a look. I've gotten so much done on this in this past week, and I wanted to share it with you because I'm super excited about the way it's looking. It's actually starting to look like what it does up here. So as you can see, I've got most of the lath on the parts that are going to be stuccoed. Lath is just this paper and wire. I've also started with the roof. I've got these overhangs done, part of this roof done. This over here, this section here is going to come down further where the end of this 2x4 is and come across and meet up with this gable. And I still have some wrapping to do at the top of the chimney. Little view on the inside. I'll give you a more in-depth look in another video, but right now, let's get back to planting our first tree in the cottage garden. You might remember I started this video a couple of weeks ago and ran into a problem with the drainage. I had dug a hole, it was really hard to dig, used a jackhammer even, and filled it up with water to make it softer, came out the next day, and the water had barely dropped, the water level. So I was worried about hard pan, a huge piece of bedrock, something that was going to hopefully not make me have to redesign this entire cottage garden and worry about the drainage in the whole area. So what seems to have happened is I hit a big patch of clay that seems to be about 9 or 10 inches down. For now though, I did mix some extra gravel and sand into the bottom of the planting hole to hopefully help that drainage a little bit, and some gypsum as well. Gypsum is great for breaking up clay soil. So one of the weird things about planting a tree is you don't want it to be too comfortable in the perfect hole that you make it. Don't put compost in the hole. Dig a hole just a little bit bigger than the pot size that you're planting, and then just put that tree right down in that hole and backfill with the native soil. The reason you don't want to put compost in there and give it this nice, comfy little cushiony bed is that it will treat that like its own pot. It will be very comfortable sending its roots out into that nice fluffy compost. And much like a pot, it will just send those roots around and around the hole, just like in a pot when it gets pot bound. And they're not going to adventure out into the native soil. They're going to spend as much time as they can in that compost. So forget the compost. And I know that goes against everything you probably are thinking, but it will help your trees get established more quickly and get a stronger root run going. Now what you can do is add some compost to the top of the soil. What I do is I make a berm, especially trees when they're first planted need a lot of water for the first year. And so I make a berm around the tree to be able to fill up with water. But what I will do is I will actually fill that berm or that area within the berm with compost as a mulch. And that's going to do a few things. That's going to keep the weeds down. That's going to keep the moisture in. And it's also going to start to break down, and the worms and the microbes in the soil are going to pull those nutrients and that organic matter down into the soil. And by that time, the roots will have already started to become established and everything will just work in harmony. Again, the biggest thing you can do for trees in the beginning is just to keep them really well watered, especially in fall, especially if you're going into a cold winter. The number one killer of fall planted trees due to weather, to cold weather, is the roots being dry. Dry roots and cold freezing temperatures absolutely don't mix. So if you live where the ground freezes, keep them well watered all the way up to the freeze. At that point you can lay off the watering. If you don't have freezes, then keep them well watered all the way through the winter. Mulch is also going to do another thing, just thinking of this. In cold winters, it will help to insulate the roots. So a nice thick layer, 3 to 5 inches of compost over the root zone is going to help a new tree just to kind of even things out temperature-wise. And the more even the temperature that you can keep it through the winter, the more the root development will occur all through the winter. And then in the spring, all those roots will be there and ready to help promote the top growth. Now, another thing we don't want to do for fall planted trees is to fertilize them. Fertilizer is going to promote top growth, and we don't want any top growth through the winter. If we want any growth at all, it's going to be the root system, but we still don't need to fertilize for that. And then the last thing you don't want to forget when you plant a tree is to stake it. However, there are many ways of staking a tree that are not optimal. For example, you can see this one came with a bamboo post already driven into the pot. I'm going to remove that. And the reason is you might see a tree planted with a stake on each side and then it's kind of lashed in between that stake to hold it still. You don't want that. You want the tree to be able to move. You don't want the root ball to move, but you want the tree to be able to sway in the wind. If you ever see me do a seed starting video, I put a fan in the area of the seeds to keep the seeds moving. It kind of strengthens their muscles so they get strong and they can withstand higher winds eventually. A lot of times if you support them so perfectly well, when those stakes are removed, that tree has not learned to stand on its own. And so the best way to stake a tree is take off any stakes like this that came with it. And in the bottom 2 feet of the trunk, you want to drive a stake 45 degrees into the ground, right next to the tree. And then you're going to lash that tree to the stake there, about between 1 foot and 2 feet off the ground, depending on the height of the tree. And what that's going to do is that's going to keep that root ball very still, very strong, but it's going to allow the top of the tree to move with the wind. And that's going to strengthen it and just make it much more robust for the rest of its life. And by the way, I was so excited to get this tree into the ground and film it for you guys that I totally forgot to put the gopher wire around it. So guess what I get to do now? Dig up the tree and start again. So I hope that helped you. I will definitely take you along when we go and pick out all of our trees for the rest of the property, including the tropical trees, which I'm really excited about. If this video did help or you learned something, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't already, share it with a friend, and I'll see you guys next time.